Today, I'm interviewing Sarah Richardson. She's the VP of IT Change Leadership at Optum and has over 25 years experience within hospitality, healthcare, and technology. Sarah also runs a business called Concierge Leadership. There, she's an ICF Associate Certified Coach, where she helps provide executives with leadership coaching as they look to achieve success and advance their roles. We talk a lot about this today. Also, Sarah's fitness and nutrition, and one of her really fun hobbies, which is scuba diving. I hope you enjoyed the show. So hello, Sarah. How are you doing?
I am fantastic, Rebecca. How are you?
Life is good. It's so great to see you.
Likewise.
Love the background there. Looks like you wish you were on the beach.
I live a block from the beach and I don't get there very often. Well, I do, but now it's dark. So yes, there's a local artist here in Hermosa Beach. So I have a lot of her work in my home, and I'm in Redondo, which is like 2 miles away. So when I can't literally walk down the street and go to the beach, then I just get to pretend that I'm in my little beach corner. So yeah, I always say awesome. It's a great place to be, but you're in New York essentially. So it's also a fantastic coast to be a part of as well.
I agree. A little bit colder, but it's never a bad idea to be dreaming of the beach. So I appreciate the background. But I'm excited to talk today. We are new friends, but have quite an interesting history of kind of missing each other through different parts of our career. So I'm excited to talk today about your success and really what's led you to where you are, and just all the impact you'll be able to make throughout the way. So I wanted to start talking a little bit about this coaching business that you have. And specifically, you've talked about what you call an integrative approach to coaching innovation. And I really love this idea that you have about helping people find their superpower. Can you tell us a little bit about where that came from and what that process is to help someone really narrow in on what they're strong at and how to make an impact in the world?
Yes, absolutely. And thanks for the question. And it is true. We are like new friends, but like old ties. So it's always really these accretive values to the networking that people do, which I think is so important. So good to be here. The superpower whole piece came out of years and years and years of being in corporate America, which is a place I'd love to be, by the way. And we do strengths finders, and we do, what are you good at? What are your pros? What are your cons? Your SWOT analysis, all this constant work. And I thought there's got to be a better thing to call it. And it wasn't like I invented calling the things that you're good at your superpowers. In fact, my husband's a giant DC Comics fan, like off the charts. We have a cat named Flash, for goodness sake. So one day he's like, all the stuff you're talking about really just sounds like superpowers. And I was like, oh, I'm using that. He's like, go for it. Use whatever you can. And so I really started talking about people's capabilities in terms of like, I just asked people, what's your superpower? And they were like, what? Like, what do you think you're best at no matter what? And it's such an empowering phrase, because rather than being a bunch of bullet points or check boxes on a report or an analysis, and all those data points are important because every piece of information we receive about ourselves and others is a data point. When you give people a chance to realize that no matter what, they're amazing at something, and 2 or 3 or 4 superpowers that line up, you take away that sense of like powerlessness that occurs when you fail, when you have a hard assignment, when you get laid off, when you get merged or acquired, or things happen. They always happen, whether there's a pandemic or there's anything else happening. Things happen in people's lives. Their ability to reframe that and create a scenario that says, no matter what happens, I will rise, I will do great, I'm amazing at these things. And as a leader for years, I realized I was already coaching people all the time anyway. And then when coaching became a thing, like people were getting their ICF credentials and really becoming coaches, I realized that 2 things were really important. Number one, I should formalize all the things I've learned over the years and then get the certifications behind me. So there was more of a sense of legitimacy of saying, hey, I'm a coach. And then being able to also monetize it separately. So I have a phenomenal job in corporate America, and I coach and lead and grow people in there. I also realized that, heck, I'm spending my time on boards and volunteering and doing all this work. Why wouldn't I monetize the ability to also be an executive coach for people outside of my own initial ecosystem? So that's what I do. And I don't advertise a lot. I get a ton of referrals from people saying, hey, I know this person, or hey, I need help with executive coaching right now. Are you available? So I'm like, well, of course. So I keep a pretty finite base of clients, but it's funny. They are just constantly referral-based connections out there. So if you come to me, you get this whole sense of like empowerment and ability that no matter what happens in your life, you will be better and stronger because of it.
That's awesome. And I can definitely see that in your passion and what you bring to the table and the people you work with, that you're helping bring out their superpower and giving them energized to really, move forward, whatever they're looking to accomplish in life. But I want to come back to that idea of helping someone find their superpower. Is that only something they're passionate about, or is that something they would maybe do if they didn't get paid? Like, how do you narrow in on, is it just, the thing you're really, really good at, or does there have to be an element of passion and monetization, maybe even to it, for somebody to really own it as a superpower?
It's an interesting way to ask the question, because when you think about, a lot of times people come to me because they're wanting to make a change in their career, whether they want the next job or the next thing that they think they're supposed to be doing. There's also a lot of people who have really entrepreneurial, fantastic ideas, and we call them side gigs, side hustles, hobbies, whatever. And what I literally tell people is, if it can pay your bills, then it can become the next thing that you're doing. It can be your job, your next passion, whatever. Otherwise, it's a hobby, whether you get paid for it or not. But you really do have to line up doing the things that you love in order to show up as your best self. So I'm helping a friend currently work through finding a role because they need a job. And during pandemic per se, you don't get to be as choosy. And the person's like, I think the job that I'm going to get lined up to do isn't my dream job. It's going to keep the lights on literally until I can continue to pursue the passions that I have. But there's enough there that it makes it obviously worth it and necessary. So too often we go into roles or we go into scenarios because we think we're supposed to, or it's just the trajectory that something has taken us on. Like, you may not be great at something and all of a sudden you're in it. Like, I have a friend who's been in finance for years. She's like, I hate finance, but she's good at it. And so now the second passion is around creating a travel blog, even during, quote unquote, again, a pandemic. And so eventually in your life, you're either going to deny yourself the things that you love to do or wait to do them, or they will continue to creep in. When you can create space for both, then that's where your superpower really aligns. And that superpower is that sense in yourself that you can have everything you want. You just may not be able to have it at the same time. So how do you create space for enough of them to come together that it's always meaningful and it's always worth it? Because time is a finite quantity.
And I know, like, for you and me, good examples, we have all these different areas that we like to play in. And I've got a creative element that's musical, athletic, and then business and technology, that I could say I have 4 different superpowers. But when you really think through the basically thing that kind of connects all of them, it, I think, makes up an even better superpower, if that makes sense. And that's what I can really own to make up my identity and make a bigger impact in the world, rather than just being a really good drummer or a really good athlete. There's a power in all of it coming together, making me an individual that I think makes just a unique imprint on the world.
Because you have at least 4 superpowers that are self-identified, which stems from confidence, think about that, what it means for you as a role model and what people see in you. So when women in technology look to you, they see all the things that they can be too. And so that becomes a space when you're confident enough to know you have multiple superpowers, you become a beacon for others that allows them to find and achieve things that maybe they didn't know how to do. And so kudos to every time you discover something that you're awesome at, and then share the things when you're not awesome. Those create those balances of like, hey, and I'm like you in that I'll try something for a while and get good at it. And then I'm like, okay, check. Like, I'm going to go get really good at something else. And that's the reinvention cycle. So that also comes from the ability to be confident. But and Rebecca, you become a role model for people because you have at least 4 identified self superpowers. That's powerful.
Awesome. And I think you made a great point earlier that it makes it less scary to fail, because you can come back to an identity and a superpower that you can already claim, and that isn't going to ever feel threatened by the fact that you might have failed at something that was just for fun.
Yeah, and you have to be careful, because sometimes our bosses will tell us we're not good at something, and then we wear it like this onerous thing around our necks. Like, I remember someone telling me that I wasn't innovative years ago. You know how long I owned that? Like, I owned that for years until I realized that in trying to prove that person wrong, all I was doing was really creating even a more vicious cycle for myself, until I started really realizing that innovation wasn't about always being the person who invented something brand new. It was really about creatively thinking about ways to solve new problems. But that lingered with me for like 10 years until I figured out a way to make it something that was like a plus in my column versus a negative, because I carried that story with me for a long time.
Wow, that's very impressive. Like, I really appreciate you sharing that, and the fact that you were able to reframe. And now, as we talk more about your career, I would say you're defined as an innovator. So I appreciate you sharing that context and that background. Another thing that we've talked about in what you do through concierge leadership are these top transformational leadership strategies. You shared with me 3. Can we walk through those and tell me a little bit more about really what they mean to you and what they mean to impacting a business overall?
Yeah, which one do you want to start with?
I love EQ. Let's talk a little bit about the EQ piece.
Okay, so emotional intelligence, but then the EQ is the emotional quotient, or when you do your evaluation. Here's what I love about EQ. A couple of things. Like anything, for us to be good, we have to be continuous learners and continuous practitioners of whatever that is. And EQ is literally considered an item that is more important than your actual intellectual intelligence when it comes to being successful, really in any scenario, because it allows you to consider the perspective of another person, truly understand what you're walking into. And the only way you ever get a glimpse into anything of any significance is to ask a lot of questions and to listen. And pause and create space for what you're hearing, and then absorb what you're hearing. And too often we just run around so fast, we don't ever let ourselves pause and consider, what is that stakeholder's interest in that business deliverable? Why is that person showing up the way that they are today? What happened in the scenario that caused this project or this endeavor to go sideways? Why do you get to 11 interviews and not get the 12th interview job? Like, there's always these components behind it. And often it's that level of curiosity and allowing yourself space to listen and process that creates that EQ. Empathy in that whole EQ space is turning out to be the biggest differentiator during COVID-19, that leaders that have genuine empathy are performing, and their organizations are performing far better than those that have a lack of that in their organizations.
Yeah, well, and they're holding on to their people who are really stressed right now and need a lot of that empathy, or else they will just move on. So it's definitely a time and space to be working on that skill set. Another one that we talked about was resilience. Tell us a little bit more about that, what that means in the ecosystem of this leadership strategy.
Sure. Do you think about things that happen to you in your life? Do they happen to you, or are they experiences? And what side of that equation do you come from? How do you'll hear me say reframe a lot, but how do you think about that scenario? How do you think about those experiences and things that happen to you? The more resilient that you are, and the more often that you are able to have the ups and downs, and they call them the acceleration and the recovery, how key that is to how you show up every day. And we have a lot of self-imposed routines or self-imposed resiliency. We go to work, we come home, we decompress. We go for a run, we come home and we cool down. We go do another hobby and we like chill after we do that. Those are all self-imposed cycles of building resilience. And the more often that you do that, the better you are at recovering when the bigger things happen. What's fascinating about that equation, though, is that by age 30, we're programmed to do basically the same things the same way all the time. Think about your morning routine. Is it always the same? Now, is it always the same because you're super efficient, or is it always the same because it just is what it is? So I encourage people, not so much driving home from work or going home from the office now, but you typically will walk the dog the same path, or you'll drive home the same way, or take the same way to an appointment every time. Go a different direction. Turn down the other street and go the back way. You always walk out of your house and jog left, jog right tomorrow. And that reframing, that alone is a jolt to your system. And it creates a little bit of resiliency, because unknowingly it creates a little bit of anxiety. So there's all the things that we can control, and there's a whole bunch of them we can't. And when you know what that balance looks like, your resiliency constantly builds up.
So Sarah, you have this idea that I'm very intrigued by and I want to talk a little bit more about, and that is 4 tips for ensuring that you're present and always on top of your game. Tell us a little bit more about that and where it came from.
Sure. So that's funny is the story behind where that came from is me walking into a one-on-one with my CEO, thinking I was totally prepared for anything that he could want because I had his list of to do or things that he cared about, list of things that I cared about. And of course, I'm prepared for my one-on-ones. They always go great. And this was not an individual who derailed conversations. That's not his MO. He's just asking valid business questions all of the time. So I went into that meeting and every question he asked me, I had no answer for. And I wasn't even going to waste his time and make up answers. And he was polite, but firm. And I said, I will come back with all the answers that you need. And he said, I know you will, which was basically like, don't do it again. And I walked out of there. I'm like, I kept thinking of this phrase my mom used to say to me when you'd have like an oops, in school or make bad decisions. And she'd be like, do you want fries with that? Because the worst thing you could ever do to me as a kid is basically assume I was ever going to like work in a fast food restaurant as an adult. So my do you want fries with that moment turned into a blog. I'm like, how do I not screw that one up again? The genesis was a little bit behind the fact that I was so focused on delivering what I thought he wanted that I really wasn't paying attention back to the EQ in a couple of recent meetings about where his mind may have been headed based on what was happening in the business. And so it's one of the very probably most humbling lessons you can learn as any executive is you need to know your domain really, really well, but you sure as heck better know theirs better. And so I'm like, what do you need to do? What are 4 things that will never fail you? So the first one's being prepared. Prepare for every scenario or conversation like it's the most important one of the day. Don't waste people's time by not being in their headspace or where they need you to be to show up. And if you don't have what you need, then be honest by going back to what? Curiosity and asking the right questions so you can learn what you need to learn. The other thing is be in the moment. I don't know about you, but I have found, especially lately, my calendar's booked every 30 minutes for 10, 12 hours a day sometimes. It was busy before, and it's even more busy now. And people love to run like 7 minutes over on all their meetings. So when I now end every meeting 5 minutes early, and I say, hey, almost the top of the hour. I'm sure somebody's got to take care of something. But being in the moment, it's not always possible, by the way, which is why preparation is so key. Be in the moment, like be there and be ready. Put your phone away, put your other laptop away, put all your distractions away and pay attention because every single person deserves to feel like they matter the most to you always. And then I always call them your go-to techniques. Like, what's your bag of questions? What are the things that you need to be aware of that are happening? What are the things like in a planned discussion? Is it going to be your agenda? Is it going to be something that allows you to bring all your facts with you so you have a reference material to look back on? Like, have your go-to techniques, have the things that work for you. Is it the outfit you wear? Is it where you sit? Is it the time of day? There's a lot of research out there about larks and owls from Daniel Pink, whom I love. And it's like, what time of day does your superpower show up best? And if it's at 3 p.m., if you're the person running the meeting, have it at 3. Because if it's at 8 o'clock in the morning and you're dead in the water, probably not the best time to be like, hey, let's go ahead and have a really important meeting at 8 o'clock in the morning when you don't function at that time. And my favorite and most important thing to always remember is be honest. If you don't know the answer, say, I don't have the best answer for you right now. I'll find out. If you're not feeling well, you just can't show up in the moment. Now, sometimes you don't have a choice, but just create that level of honesty. And especially right now, that honesty comes in that whole empathy space again.
And it's interesting you talk about the world that we live in now. And I was thinking on your be in the moment piece, as I'm interacting with customers, and it's probably the life you're leading right now too, it's back to back to back calls. And sometimes, you're getting caught in catching up on email or the instant message on the side and just distracted and multitasking. But the reality is, in a lot of scenarios, the people on the other side of the call aren't, and they only have that 1 hour in that agenda to get what they need from you to go back and do their job. And so by not being in the moment, you miss a very influential moment with that group and you can't get it back. They're off and like, oh, I forgot. And then you're messing up their flow by sending them an instant message or email. So there's really, especially in a virtual world, a lot of meaning behind being in the moment because it's how you can be effective Zoom call after Zoom call or Zoom call. So that's
you
good.
have 20 seconds when you meet somebody before they form an impression of you. 20 seconds. Isn't that crazy? First impression. That's how fast it gets formed. And it can take something like, with the research, like 20 hours to repair a bad one if that's how it started out.
Yeah, it's true. Even over Zoom, people are paying attention. So, well, I've loved talking a little bit about what you're doing with concierge leadership, but I want to move now to talking about the fact that you're also a practitioner. I want to talk through what you're doing right now at Optum, and specifically a really cool piece about where you're at and the role there, and the fact that you built the role and you're getting to really make your own impression on that company. Talk us a little bit through how you got there and what this role that you've built looks like.
Yes. Terrifying to do it. I'm going to throw it out there. Always these moments of like, am I doing what I think I'm doing? I spent 10 years, well, let's back up. So my whole career aiming to become a CIO. That was my goal in my 30s. And I did. And I was a CIO for 10 years in 3 different companies. And at about that decade mark, I thought, this is really cool. It's really hard. And I keep learning. You're never going to stop learning being a CIO. And how do I take all of my superpowers and turn them into my full-time gig? So I'm fine. I can do all of the data pieces. I can do all the CIO stuff. And then I realized that I have a talent for talent development, for leadership, communication, culture, development, change, process piece, all the things that like people say are soft skills, which always drives me crazy because it's really hard to do this stuff well. And for me to always be constantly being a practitioner, to your point, how could I make that an offering that we really doubled down on at work? And so at the time, it's about 2 years ago, our CIO, and you work in a corporation, there's always a CIO above you, by the way, like always. He was like, hey, we've got a really big agenda in front of us for the next decade. We've got to bring all these companies together while we grow almost quintuple in size in 10 years. That's the goal for growth. So can you do that thing that you do everywhere? And I said, essentially, yes. It wasn't like a quick conversation. We have to really incrementally start. So what we've done over time is really double down and focus on some of those key areas. And at first we called it change management, and otherwise people thought I was in charge of ITIL, which is a component of some of the work that I do, and it's important. Mm-hmm. And how could we frame it so that it was more than just people thinking that I was running change advisory board when we put in a new, patch or a new code into the system. So we created change leadership, and meaning setting that vision, setting that future, bringing things together, being able to articulate where we're headed, and really creating a compelling reason for people to want to be in the organization. It's a term that I'm stealing from this morning from a conversation with a friend. He said, hey, we're all paid volunteers. I was like, I'm stealing that in general. I literally stole it this morning after all these years of talking about people making a choice to be where they are. I'm like, it's paid volunteerism, because if you create an opportunity where people want to be there because they can do their best work, which we've been talking about for years, love what you do, then you want to make sure that they don't want to do it anywhere else. And it's so easy to forget about that being every single person in that greater fabric. So that's really what it comes down to, is we wanted to create a space where, yes, lean processes are important. And yes, we should have Six Sigma as a part of that conversation for architecture and the myriad things that we do. Yes, people side is huge. And so maybe you put the ProSci methodology behind that. Yes, you have to have a catalog and different processes that are industry standards. So of course you're going to use ITIL. Well, if you're going to have those 3 things, as I call them, work together, everything that wraps around that is the acumen to be able to do so. And that is the communication and the culture and the education and the talent and the empathy and all those different pieces coming together. So it's really what we endeavor to do. Would I say it's successful? Yes. Would I say it's nascent? Yes. Would I say it's high risk? Absolutely. Because those are all important things. Does the train stay on the rails without them? Yes, it's just a much bumpier ride.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I think that's similar problems that are being solved in every industry. But the interesting thing about your background is it's been heavily healthcare. So are there elements of that that are unique to healthcare and ways that you have to approach the business differently with the fact that you're in a very highly regulated industry, focusing on patient care, which is one of the most important things right now?
And what I love about healthcare, because I started in hospitality, by the way, my first 7 years of my career, hospitality degree from UNLV, worked in 4 casinos, opened 3 of them, expanded 1, worked in an airline. Like I thought I'd be in tourism for my entire life, loved everything about it. until the airline went bankrupt. And I'm like, oh, I was like 25. I'm like, I need a job. So I went to go work at the county hospital, and I've been in healthcare ever since. So I'm over 20 years now. And the why behind that is that every company, every industry, rightfully so, the people that work there, the team members that are there really should and hopefully believe in the products they're producing. That you have this sense of like, we produce something that matters. And that's absolutely a truism. So no matter what business you work in, if you are absolutely tied to the output of your organization, then that's a good thing. What's interesting about healthcare, and I started healthcare in an indigent county academic teaching facility. So you see some really interesting scenarios. And you really do realize that by being a technologist, what you do, people can die, and it does save lives. So when the interface goes down in the NICU in the middle of the night, you better make sure your team is there to fix it. And when we have a pharmacy overflowing because we have homeless patients who've come in for care and need to get their meds, so they stay out of the hospital, even though we know they're going to stay on the street, can we at least make sure that they can be as safe as possible? Then all those different interfaces or all those different printers and intricacies and supply chain pieces and the pneumatic tube systems, like those have to work. And so what you do does save lives every single day. And then when you partner with your clinicians to put those solutions in, like you don't just put in a product because it's fancy. You put in a product because you're solving a problem that someone brought to you and you do it together. Like I never forget our ER docs were some of my favorite people in the universe because the stuff they had to see every day and the way that they would be willing to try things that made it easier for them to do their jobs. And this is back in the early 2000s when EMRs were becoming more and more prolific and required. You know, regulatory compliance, HIPAA was coming up, all these different pieces. They would just give you this look. I'm like, hey, I'm in it with you. I get it. And those partnerships about I'm not a clinician, but if I can help a clinician save a life, then that matters. And if you receive your own healthcare inside your own system, you sure do pay attention at a different level. So a lot of people don't, probably 50% for different reasons. I have always received my healthcare from the company I work for in the healthcare scenario. And that too makes it very personal.
Your hospitality background, automatically those instincts come back, and you just brought it to healthcare in the scenario you're in now. And that's what's helped you be even more successful. So
yeah, I used to get in a lot of trouble when I would say that working in a hotel and a hospital are very similar, which is why I made the transition, because they are very similar. Guess what? You have cafeteria, you have rooms, you have beds, you have check-in, you have checkout, you have registration, checkout. They're down to the healthcare versus the entertainment value. The behind the scenes is not that different. And you have to, if you tell a casino operator that it doesn't matter that something's not working, it does. And so yes, patients are involved and that's a differentiator, but all those systems that make those places run, in some cases are the same vendors.
no, that makes perfect sense. I want to talk a little bit now about another idea that you presented to me that I found really intriguing, and that is how your identity is not in a job title. And kind of the scenario you went through, the fact that you always wanted to be a CIO, then you were a CIO, and now you're not. And for all intents and purposes, you're focused on other parts of the business. So talk us through how you came to the realization that your identity is not tied up in a job title and how that can really be empowering to help you make a bigger impact in the business.
Yeah, this is a super personal question because it took me not being successful in a very important role to me to realize that it wasn't about my job title anymore. It was about what did I bring to the table and where could I do those things where it was a better cultural fit. So I didn't fail at my job per se. I failed at joining an organization where we were diametrically opposed to what it meant to be successful in that organization. And it's funny because my boss from that organization, you know, it's 5-6 years later, and we talk about it. He's like, man, you were like the best hire, worst fit ever. I was like, thanks for making me move across the country to figure it out. You know, it's like now we look back and we're like, we had a drink and talked about it a while back, and I could still call him if I needed to. But at the time it was devastating. Like my identity was like, oh, my next big hospital system, and I'm moving my family across the country and all these great things, and then not great things. And that was hard. That was really hard. And that's also when I opened my coaching business, because for me to crawl out of like the depths of despair of what I'd created in that scenario, what I thought for myself, was how do you get out of it? And it taught me two very valuable lessons. Make sure that you have what I call the backup plan. Like there's got to be a way to still keep things alive. But it also made me realize that I still had all these talents and all these capabilities. They just weren't right for that job. It's like and heck, I've been divorced. So am I like an awesome wife to my current husband? Absolutely. We have an amazing relationship. But if you ask our exes what they think about us, they'd probably tell you we're horrible humans because it was just a bad fit after a while. But that happens. Sometimes the job doesn't fit. Sometimes the relationship doesn't work. And it's not that you don't have great things about you and always work to get better, but it has to be the right fit. And that's also why I tell people, you may be the best technologist ever, but what if you and your boss don't work out? And 80% of people leave jobs because of bosses, and bosses change. I've had 5 bosses in 5 years in my company.
Wow. Mm-hmm.
Thank goodness I like them all. I've been very fortunate because we keep getting acquired. But I'll tell you, as soon as you are what you do for a living, then in rare cases, those can probably be congruent statements. But you got to be careful because things change fast in business today, and your identity needs to be tied to who you believe you are and what you bring to the table, not just in that singular scenario in which it's being applied.
That's good. And look at the doors it's opened and where you are now. I'm sure it would have been a very different path if you had just stayed in a role that wasn't really a good fit.
Yeah, I think about the people that I know and the experiences and what I can share with people. And even this morning, I was talking to a contact who I met through my time in that role, who has changed my life. She's just one of those people you need and love to know. And we met through a Cerner workshop 6 years ago. She's now retired. So I'm like, how can I be you someday? And she's like, keep doing what you're doing. And you check in once in a while. But like all those relationships, every experience, you're going to meet people who change your life. Let them.
I agree. That's awesome. Well, you said that was a personal question, but now I have more personal things I want to talk about. And that's something fun we have in common, which is scuba diving. And you don't just like recreationally every once in a while go take a scuba dive. You've like, I think 1,500 dives under your belt.
Yeah.
Tell us about how you found scuba diving and what that means to really bringing a balance to your life.
Yeah, I love it. So this is so funny because I don't think you and I do anything halfway. You know, it's like when I got certified originally, I'm like, oh, wait, you can get an advanced certification. You can get a rescue certification. You can be a dive master. I can be an instructor. I can be an instructor. Wait, I can go technically dive. And so it just kept going from there. I love the water. I'm a water sign. I've always loved the water. So, back 20 plus years ago, my friends and I were going to Cayman and like, hey, what do you do in Cayman besides drink beer? And apparently you scuba dive. So we all learned to scuba dive, fell in love with it. And I was really fortunate that like in anything in life, my instructor, and I was living in Vegas at the time, was this retired guy who just loved scuba diving. So he was always available to scuba dive. And so a group of us just kept going. My buddy Troy and I went all the way through Dive Master together. And I just kept doing it. So it was fascinating about it, not just loving that whole space in life. Because you want to talk about a total escape from like technology. When you're on a boat, literally in the middle of the ocean on a liveaboard, there's no internet. And so maybe it was, luck, or maybe it was strategically planned. You literally could unplug because you had to. And I come back from vacation and be like, oh, life's so amazing. Everyone's like, man, you come back from your trips like so energized. I'm like, I don't work. I can't. There's no internet on this boat. There's 20 people in the middle of the ocean. What was fascinating about the scuba diving community is that when I left Las Vegas to move to Nashville, corporate for HCA, that was a huge life change. But the first thing I did was go to the local dive shop and say, I'm an instructor. I'm relocating. How can I join your team? And, it worked out. They had space. I passed all my, checklist items. Most of those people from that shop, guess what? Still my best friends today. That was my sub or my tribe, my sub community. So what happens 3 years later? I get relocated to Kansas City, Missouri. And when you're thinking like you went scuba diving in Nevada and Tennessee and Missouri, yeah, divers find a way. There's lots of quarries and lakes. So the first thing I do when I get to Kansas City, I go to the local dive shop. And that's where I met my second husband. Like we were both instructors together and we both ended up separately divorced. It sounds like it should be a scandalous story. It's really not. But we both ended up divorced. And then we're teaching all the time anyway. And so we're together every weekend. So my second husband, we were scuba diving instructors together. So
Awesome.
to this day, it's a lifelong passion. I do not teach anymore. After 17 years, I'm feeling like I'm not teaching anymore. But that's because the water in California is really cold. And even with a dry suit, I don't do cold.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I'm with you.
We go all over the world, amazing adventures, meet people all over the world. My favorite part too is that when you're on a dive boat with a bunch of people you may or may not have ever met, other than your dive skills, which people always love to joke, tease each other. At the end of the day though, let's just say everybody on the boat is a great diver. Nobody cares what you do for a living.
Mm-mm.
You have a cardiac surgeon, you can have someone who builds custom Harleys, you can have anybody, any walk of life, everybody is the same. So if you think of a sport that has probably the greatest sense of true diversity and inclusion, it's scuba diving, because you do put your life in each other's hands.
I totally agree. That was something I was thinking of as you were talking about your experience through it, is the fact that you are completely yourself when you're going out to the ocean and all you're thinking about is breathing. It's
Yep.
almost like meditation. You're only focused on your breathing. That's the only thing you have to do right to stay alive underwater. And that's a success. So it's a cool place to be.
Yep. I'm glad you like it too.
Oh, I love it. Another thing we have in common is a passion for athletics, fitness, and wellness. You've built a little bit of a coaching business around that too. Tell us about how you impact people through helping them through their fitness and nutrition.
Sure. So I am a certified personal trainer through the National Academy of Sports Medicine. I am like this close to my nutrition certification. I will also get weight loss and behavioral certifications, probably by like Groundhog Day is kind of my goal, a never ending quest. Everyone's like, why are you doing that? Like, are you kidding me? You go up thing after thing after thing. Well, if you are coaching to bring out the absolute best in people, to create a superpower, are you going to show up in your superpower if you are tired, poor nutrition, poor hydration, like low activity in your life? No. To be your best self, you have to also take care of yourself. And that does mean from a physical perspective. I mean, I don't care if you go to the gym every day and your BMI is ideal, because that's actually not the best way to measure your health anyway. Right? Are you eating healthy? Are you sleeping? Are you hydrating? Are you exercising? Are you doing the things that are good for you so that you can show up and do all those things? If those are important to me, I can't talk about them with you if I don't have the education behind them. And so now what I'm finding, interestingly enough, is that as much about talking about your boardroom EQ and your presence, the questions are also about how much sleep are you getting? How much water are you drinking? What are you eating? Those are components of your self-monitoring, or the catalog of information that I ask you to collect about yourself in our coaching journey. Is that when you have a level of awareness, you start to be able to pinpoint what you can, I like to say a lot of times perfect, but there's no such thing. It's a continuous journey. But if you're going to get better at something, you have to be intentional about it.
That's awesome. Well, I want to finish with one last question for you, and it's around principles. Throughout your life and career, what has been one principle that's helped you be successful?
I learned this from my mother, and she passed away of cancer this year. So it's one of those things that reminds me even more, because I think, what would she be saying to me? What should she be reminding me? What would she be doing? And it is to be kind. Always. Or be nice. But at the end of the day, you know what? In a world full of everything that else is out there, be kind. And you'd be amazed at how far kindness goes. And do not mistake kindness with weakness, because they are not the same thing. You can be a very nice person and still have resolve of steel. But I truly believe that anytime you can help people and think about where they're coming from, then you're going to establish a rapport far better than any other way you ever could have done so.
That's awesome. I love it. And that's a great way to remember your mom. It's pretty special.
Yep.
Thanks for sharing today, Sarah. This was so much fun. I loved having you on the show. And I appreciate you taking a little time away from maybe the nice beach or some scuba diving you could be doing right now to chat a little bit about your experience in life.
Well, thank you. You are a powerhouse in what you are doing. And when I say that you're a beacon for women in technology to follow, then you are. And that's that generation of like, hey, I'm over here and you need to watch what she's doing, because you are setting the pace for everything that's to come. So kudos to you for what you're doing. And thank you for allowing me to spend some time with you today.
You're awesome. Well, hey, you have a great weekend and we'll hang out again soon.
Take care.